Hi, and welcome to the Ada K Show. I am Ada K. Brown, and am currently a criminal justice major, and I'm a deaf courtroom commentator. Grab a cup of Java, and let's dive in.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. How are y'all today? I hope you're having a good day. We have several things happening. Good morning, Miss Toxic. Good morning, Dave. Good morning, Miss June. Hello, everybody. How are y'all doing? One sunny day. Hello, y'all. Well, I can't believe it. We are on day 3 of the prosecution and closing arguments. She's over 9 hours of closing right now. Does anybody know her exact number? I really want to know what her numbers are on her closing. It has been a very brutal third day, 2 days. So we'll see where she stands when we come in. I was going to take bets on I literally was gonna take bets on how long she was gonna take to close. I'm popping out my chat so I can do some fun stuff with y'all. Pop out chats. There we go. Let it go. So, how was y'all's weekend? Share with me. Mine was pretty quiet. Didn't do a ton of stuff. How many? What should I put in there for y'all? Exhausted? I bet you are. I'm trying to type up a poll. I am. I am. Toxic, I just wanted to do a gentle reminder there are 2s in the channel. Do we have both Junes in the channel today? That would be cool. That would be cool. Okay, I'm starting a poll. We'll see how that goes. Oh. Yes. There will be a rebuttal. There will be a rebuttal. I don't doubt that at all. It's hard for me to type and talk at the same time. My brain doesn't function that way. Okay, we got all that done. Restful and tired. I knew last night he told me. What? Just sent you in the chat at June. So, oh, Toxic, you're talking to June? I hope everything's going better for you, Toxic. I know it's been a long last couple weeks, if not months. I've been praying for you and your husband, especially over that airplane thing. I hope that's all resolving. I got glitter all over me today, y'all. It fell all over my face with the eyeshadow. I'm the one with the last name. You guys, I don't know if y'all saw it, but I'm learning how to do some things. And one of the things I did was the premiere. I don't know if you know. So when you click on to I'm trying to get my windows settled. When you click onto a live, like you're waiting for me to hop in, it runs a little bit of a premiere. I got to make one for Karen Reed's trial. That will be something I'm going to be working on tonight. It's cool. Kind of like it. Have you all seen it? When you go on to the Lori Vallow, if you're waiting for that one, go in now and click notify me. You'll get a little thing I'm previewing. I'm horrible at making the videos. I'm not good at that. But I'm going to work on a good one for Karen Reed. Karen Reed, I watched a little bit of the jury selection this morning. It's the same old thing, nothing new. They could just rewind and wash, recycle. But I heard them say 6 to 8 weeks of trial. What? Yes, they are anticipating 6 to 8 weeks. Didn't they go 13 weeks last time? Didn't they get into like 13 weeks last time? I don't know. What do you think? Do you believe that it is going to be a 6 to 8 week trial? Are you confident or thinking at all that they can keep it at that time frame? Six to 8 weeks. I'm typing it in. Or let me see. Or do you I'm trying to start using all these tools, y'all.
Had a good weekend. And Ms. Subin, you may continue.
Good morning, welcome back.
Monica Sementilli, why are you smiling? Girl, I wouldn't be
Left off on
smiling if I
Friday,
was you.
We're talking about the various statements the defendant made to law enforcement. That each time she was interviewed,
Oh, God help
rather
us.
than trying to assist them and provide information, she lied. We talked about this on Friday, and one of the things that Detective Parshall repeatedly asked every time she called into the LAPD was whether or not she had replaced the security system. She indicated she was still waiting for the insurance money. And again, all of these are recorded. And Detective Parshall said it was the first thing that she should do. But you heard she never did. And then we talked about the day after her call in to Detective Parshall, the next night, March 9th, when, as you guys saw, the SIS surveillance crew was following the defendant and Baker, and they followed them that night to the Goodnight Bar and the Laugh Factory Comedy Club. And this is one of the nights where Bella tried to get her mother to come home because she was afraid of being home alone. And of course, we hear the response from Jessica and the again text message back from Isabella talking about how she's always home alone. There's never anybody there. She's afraid about being in the house alone, and it's worse when she's alone. It's very clear from the evidence that we heard that she was in distress and fearful. But again, what we learned was that the defendant only cared about herself. And so we also saw the text message where Isabella made the comment that she's going to make a therapy appointment the next day. And then, of course, what we saw is the defendant's attempt to try to make her youngest daughter, Isabella, feel guilty. And you can see that she was successful based on Isabella's response. And then, of course, Jessica saying, you know, Mom, don't feel bad, because she believes her mom is grieving and wants her to be out and be able to enjoy herself. But this has become obviously a nightly thing. So again, another manipulation in this case by the defendant, in this case of her daughters, who she was also using to lie for her to people. And she, as we saw, lied to them day after day after day and left them alone to try and recover from this tragedy.
Y'all, my honey just walked in and he looked at the screen and he goes, man, she gets uglier by the day. That's why I'm laughing, y'all.
That was their father's murder. Again, another call, this time on March 16th. Detective Parshall calls the defendant. He mentions to her during this phone call that he's been talking to this burglary crew, which we know was really the detectives from Robbery Homicide Division, wanting to meet with her. And once again, we see the defendant is asking about the DNA results because she's trying to stay a step ahead of law enforcement, and so that she can also report back to Baker, as we talked about last week. Once again, she lies to Detective Parshall and tells them that it's only the children who are beneficiaries of the life insurance policy, and also claims that she's unaware of the fact that Fabio had stock by saying maybe he had some stock. So again, more evidence of the fact that she's lying to law enforcement because she doesn't want them to believe that she has skin in the game or that she is a financial motive here. And then, of course, you heard from Melanie Garibay, Melanie being the show director at Wella, and you saw and heard that the defendant lied to Melanie Garibay by claiming that Fabio knew she was planning this trip with her girlfriends to Las Vegas, and she's using Melanie for her business connections so that she can get a deal in Las Vegas. And so Melanie testified about the first and second round of text messages that she got from the defendant. And here's the first round where
that company can get in trouble for using that connection for her for a non-business trip.
Reaches out and she's asking Melanie if she can get her a deal. They have a phone conversation, as you heard from Melanie, and then Melanie proceeds to text her and say, we got you in a suite at the Vidara and a discounted rate. And here you see at the bottom, the defendant is asking what's the rate, and we know the rate wound up being $99 a night. for the suite that she and Robert Baker shared when they went to Vegas the first time.
For a
And then you heard from Ron Ray, who came in from
you can pay $100 a night and get something without cockroaches around here.
Las Vegas, who was a longtime friend of Robert Baker. And he first meets the defendant in March through Robert Baker. They come to his home, the home he shares with his wife, Michelle. They go out for lunch. And during the time they spent together, not once did the defendant mention that she had been previously married. She never mentions Fabio. She never mentions during the lunch or at their home that she has children. She doesn't mention the fact that she's a widow. And we talked about the fact that there's this odd moment where he's trying to input her contact information into his cell phone. And the defendant and Robert Baker say, just put down Monica Baker. And you heard the defendant acted like.
Even back in 2017 for a suite, that's usually $300 or more. That's one hell of a company discount.
She had a lot of money. She asked Ron Ray, who is in the stock market, about how she could invest in the market. She talked about selling an expensive piece of property in the LA area. That would be the house on Queen Victoria. And then she knew Michelle was a real estate agent. So she was asking Michelle about buying another piece of property in the Las Vegas area for Baker, and that they were going to come and go from that property and travel. He also introduced the photographs that you see here, where they all go out to some expensive dinner that night at a restaurant called Andrea's. Again, where the defendant orders an expensive bottle of wine for herself, paid for everybody's dinner, and then again began this crude talk about her sex life with Baker, how great he was in bed, and Ron talked about how she kept grabbing Robert Baker's crotch, which normally you might think he was exaggerating, except that you saw the same behavior photographed. Then they all go out, as you heard, to a nightclub in one of the casinos, and as Ron said, the defendant
I really don't need that image in my head this early in the morning.
Acted like she was a 22-year-old on spring break. You remember he was describing her behavior as she acted like she was humping Robert Baker up on the stage with the DJ and some of the other despicable conduct.
Despicable.
Now, on that same night where the defendant is out partying with Baker, with Ron and his wife, Michelle, she takes the time to post again to Instagram. And this is a post that takes place. She does it at 8:06 p.m. And she, as you can see here, is continuing to play her role as the heartbroken widow who lost her best friend. Because, of course, she can't be honest about the fact that she's out partying in Las Vegas with her lover, because that sort of scandalous behavior would destroy what she's trying to create, and that is the perception that she's the victim, so she can engender sympathy and get a lot of people to fall all over themselves to want to help her. So that's the same night. Later on that month, the defendant calls Detective Parshall again on March 30th, and now she's talking about the life insurance again. She says she wants to drop off some paperwork for him to sign, and they have a conversation about the car keys from the Porsche, and she tells them that they were always kept in the drawer, in the kitchen drawer. And we talked last week about that placard number 12 in the kitchen counter where there was a drip of blood belonging to Baker just below the monitor. Again, once the defendant returns from Las Vegas, later that same night that she has this conversation with Detective Parshall, we now see that Jessica is texting her mother, when are you coming home? And you see that we basically have a role reversal. We have the 18-year-old who's acting as the parent, trying to figure out where her mother is and what time she'll be home, because as Jessica testified, after the murder, she frequently didn't know where her mother was at all hours of the night. And then that same conversation goes on. On the following night, you heard March 31st, the defendant slept over at Robert Baker's, but told her daughter she was sleeping at Sheila's, which you'll be able to see again from that text exchange between them. Then you heard from Gail Burlingame, someone who is unconnected really to the defendant or Fabio, but she was a salesperson, as you recall, at the Ford dealership in Thousand Oaks, and she was completely manipulated by the defendant at first, if you recall. When she came in, she said that she was taken by the fact that the defendant seemed to be so grief-stricken, whose husband was brutally murdered, and now she had no money. And the defendant told Miss Burlingame that she didn't even have enough money to pay her bills. She was desperate for money, and she was waiting for the life insurance money on her husband's life to come in so that she could support herself and her daughters. And so you heard from Gail Burlingame, if you recall, that while the defendant was at the dealership, she made several calls to what the defendant said was her attorney. And it was obvious to Gail at some point that it wasn't an attorney because the defendant was whispering and it didn't sound like a legal discussion to her. The next time Gail reached out to her after reaching out to corporate headquarters and trying to assist the defendant in being able to turn in Fabio's Ford F-150 because she felt so bad for the defendant, she tested.
This here was a bunch of lies came out during this. She got herself in trouble on this. And if I didn't have anything else to convict her on, this would have probably pushed me over the edge. She lied every time she walked in that door. And she didn't keep the lies straight.
Much happier, and the defendant reported that she had just gotten the payout from the life insurance money and that she needed a new car. Now we know that's false, but that was the story.
Y'all look at her binder. It's half. It's almost laying perfectly. We're halfway through. Oh my God. Anybody, who is it that was coming up with the time, how long that she's done a closing? Because I think 12 hours is the record. Somebody said.
She gave to Gail Burlingame. And you heard that Gail tried to talk her into keeping Fabio's car because the defendant had said that she and the girls really wanted to keep the car because it made them feel this connection to him. And so Gail went to all these lengths to work out some kind of a deal where they could do that. And now the defendant is basically telling Gail that she wants a new car. And so you heard the defendant returned to the dealership on April 3rd of 2017. And when Gail asked the defendant what her budget was, the defendant said she didn't know. And you heard that during this 5 to 6 long hour interaction between Gail and the defendant kept leveling up to more and more expensive vehicles. The defendant wanted a convertible, but the issue was she wanted black rims, which were so important to her. And when they finally drove the Mustang that the defendant ultimately leased, the defendant made the comment to Gail that she felt like they were Thelma and Louise. So the defendant eventually decided that day on the black Mustang that you see here. The defendant told Gail that she felt happy again because she could start her new life now that she had this new car. But then the defendant decided to call her friend Robert to come in. And she said that she wanted her friend Robert to test drive the car because it might be his too, and that he was going to be driving the car. And you heard what happened, that when he came to the dealership, as we all know, when you go to a dealership to test drive, they always require you to hand over your license, and he refused to do that. And Gail told you that during her interactions that afternoon with the defendant and this individual, Robert, it became pretty clear to her that she was being duped by the defendant. You also heard from Cesar Aviles, who was the sales manager at the dealership, that the defendant lied to him initially when she first came in and said that Fabio had been killed inside of the Ford F-150, and so she no longer felt comfortable driving that car, that she cried throughout their meeting, And he recalls that she called a male 3 to 4 times during the course of their meeting, and he could hear the male's voice on the other end of the phone. She wanted to return the car, but as he said, it had nothing to do with price, which was the argument the defense tried to make to you. You heard that Caesar, being the nice guy that he was, offered to buy the vehicle back. It wouldn't cost the defendant anything. She could just turn in the Ford F-150 and walk away from the dealership without getting a new car. Instead, what you heard is when she came back on that April 3rd date and spent so much time with Gail that she wound up leasing this new Mustang for $62,000. And as Caesar talked about, she purchased every available option. There was no negotiation that went on, and that she paid substantially more money. I think he said somewhere between $15,000 and $25,000 more than what it would have cost to just keep the Ford F-150. And you heard that when the defendant came home that day, there were people that were waiting for her at the house who were expecting to have a meeting with her about a tribute that they were putting on for Fabio. And when the defendant came home, she told Melanie Garibay, Carol Protat, some of Fabio's colleagues, that she had given an Academy Award-winning performance at the dealership that day. She told them what a good actress she was, which is true, and that she made the salespeople feel sorry for her by playing the grieving widow, which we all knew by that point in the trial was her favorite role to play. And then we heard the defense try to make this sound less despicable than it was by making fun of it and saying, well, who doesn't love a good deal? As if somehow this is all a big joke. In reality, what this is shameful behavior. And the real question is, who would use their husband's murder to get anything? On April 8th, you saw some photographs and the description of additional photographs of the defendant out front of her new Mustang. You can see the decal from DCH Ford in the window, taken by Baker as he's looking out from inside of the driver's seat of the Mustang at the defendant, who's standing out front smoking a cigarette. On that same date, the defendant posts to Instagram a happy birthday to Luigi, Fabio's son, where she pokes fun and says something about every fairy tale having a wicked stepmother, and then goes on to, again, ingratiate herself to her stepson. So again, another example of the defendant using the social media account to try and manipulate people, decent people, especially those closest to her. Then the defendant calls Detective Parshall again on April 17th. He once again asks her about the DVR installation, and once again, the defendant lies to him. She says that she never had remote access. Once again, that she wasn't present when the DVR and the new system was installed with the new cameras. Again, another lie. And that Fabio told her the guys had come to do the installation while he was home and put in the new monitor. And then she also says no one had remote access to their new system, which we also know is a lie. She still hadn't replaced the DVR security system that Parshall asks her about, even though at this point we know that State Farm has paid out the money on the home insurance claim because she's painting and buying new carpeting and new curtains. Because, of course, the defendant isn't concerned with security at the house for herself or her daughters, because she knows who the real killer is. And so again, the defendant wants to celebrate Robert Baker's birthday in Las Vegas. So she reaches out again to Melanie Garibay. And Melanie Garibay once again comes through, this time with a 2-bedroom suite, because as you heard, they were going to travel to Las Vegas with Ricardo Cabrera and Sheila. And so she gets her a suite that we heard was normally $600 a night for $199.
What?
And then
Y'all heard that? A suite, normally $600 a night, she gets for $199. Huh?
you saw the
She just used everybody to get free crap.
defendant invited Sheila and Ricardo to join them to help celebrate Baker's birthday. And here she volunteers even to pay for the entire suite herself. And you saw that she sent a picture of the penthouse suite that they were getting, and she sends the picture to Sheila. And then we know that in May, the defendant and Robert Baker flew to Las Vegas for this celebratory vacation, and Sheila and Ricardo travel separately by car and meet them there. And then, of course, the night before they leave for Las Vegas, she and Robert Baker are once again out until after 3 a.m, again with the eldest daughter asking her where she is, and the defendant saying at 3:18 that she's almost home. The following day, on May 3rd, the defendant sends these photographs to Sheila saying Vidara Cabana time. And you can see her here with Baker and Al Birdsong in the background. And then, of course, the photographs from the birthday celebration at Marrakesh restaurant that you heard about. As you heard from Ron Ray, this was an expensive restaurant, and the defendant said, "Don't worry about it. I got money. I'll take care of it." And after this, they went to a strip club that the defendant wanted to go to, where again, she ordered expensive wine, became loud and obnoxious. As you heard from Ron Ray, she was grabbing strippers by their breasts and was basically out of control, as Ron Ray described. As he also mentioned, clearly not somebody who was grieving the loss of a 20-year marriage. Then on May 5th, after dinner, we saw the defendant, along with Robert Baker and Sheila and Ricardo Cabrera, go to the Ghost Bar at the Palms Casino. And obviously, these photographs are worth 1,000 words or more, because they show a very different picture than the one that was presented for you as this grieving woman who was devastated. And obviously, we know from all of the photographs that came out from various individuals that supplied them to law enforcement, when
She looked really devastated, didn't she? She looked like she was a real grieving widow. No, she's just a party hoe.
the witnesses described the defendant as extremely happy, and the opposite of grief was displayed by her behavior. We saw that wasn't an exaggeration at all in the photos themselves. And they depict exactly what Ron Ray described in March, the same type of behavior. And as Sheila testified, after the murder, the defendant never mentioned her husband, didn't mention her daughters, and that she and Baker appeared to be a couple, just as they had discussed prior to the murder and had planned on several occasions before. Now, in May, the defendant calls Detective Parshall several times because she's fed up. She needs the money. She tells the detective in these recorded calls that she's having difficulties due to their fact that they're delaying the money that she's rightfully entitled to, the money that Fabio left to her through the life.
I finally figured out what irritates me so much about her. It's the way she talks. wants to, the way she's going to, she got her hair done. It's at at the end of every 2 words.
Insurance. She still has no security system. She's upset that the detectives have not paid out on the policy until she's been cleared. She talks about the fact that the dealership had to buy back Fabio's Ford F-150 because she couldn't afford the $15,000 it would have cost her. But again, she lies to them because she doesn't tell them that she's just leased a brand new, fully loaded Mustang. She tells them that she wants answers. And as you heard from Detective Parshall, he tells her that he can't discuss the case and that the evidence has to be remain confidential until they conclude their investigation. And at this point, we know that he's already meeting with robbery homicide detectives and setting up the meeting that's going to occur in June. Again, on May 18th, this was the day that Detective Parshall introduces the defendant to the robbery homicide detectives, Gable and Tellis. They go to the house, they conduct a walkthrough. We heard the surreptitious recording from inside of Detective Gable's pocket, where they talk about the safe and the slider door in her master bedroom. The defendant again says the safe was untouched, that she never got a text from the AT&T Digital Life system from the mirror sensor I talked about last week. Only she gets those texts to her phone. Fabio does not, which means on the date of January 23rd, when she opened the safe to remove the gold coins, Fabio wouldn't have known about it. And she says that they barely use the safe. The only thing Fabio or they keep in the safe is the gun. And now it's been minimized, and she says, in a couple of gold coins. And once again, she tells Detective Gable and Tellis that she doesn't have access to the camera system remotely through her phone. Just of note, there's a piece of evidence that was played, but it was very quick. It's an exhibit on the day prior to this of Al Birdsong, where he calls the defendant on her cell phone and leaves a message to have Rob call me. So again, showing the connections between the various individuals involved in this conspiracy. He knows her cell phone number. Now, on May 24th, the defendant again makes a call to Detective Parshall. She now is getting desperate. She tells them that they don't even have a roof over their head, really, even though she's living in this large, expensive home, going on one trip after another. And of course, she doesn't mention any of that to law enforcement. She tells Detective Parshall.
You guys, the results of the poll. 29% think she's going to go 1 to 2 hours. 14% 2 to 3, 14% 2 to 3 to 4, but 43, almost half of you think she's going to go on for more than 4 hours. I'm going to end that poll. Oh my gosh. That is a dreadful thought. If they're still going when the Lori Daybell trial hops on, we're cutting it off. We're going to Lori Daybell. And I'll just do a verdict watch until we figure out what's going on. But let's get back into it.
That MetLife needs one last confirmation in writing to complete the clearance, because now all the children have been cleared, but she has not. And she asks him repeatedly on whether there's anything they can do or we can do to speed up this process so that she can get the money. And Detective Parshall tells her that the burglary detectives want to meet with her again around the 9th of June, but we know that's when she's going to New York. That same day, May 24th, she's packing because we know the next day she leaves to fly to Myrtle Beach with Robert Baker so they can go to Beach Bike Week. And we heard that Morella and Salma Cherry were at an industry memorial for Fabio in Toronto during this time period. And as Morella said, the defendant said that she couldn't go because she had already planned to go to Myrtle Beach to walk a golf course that was on Fabio's bucket list, and she was going to walk the course alone in his honor. And then also you heard from her sister Anna, who knew she was lying, as well as Deborah Obad, who also knew the defendant was lying. And then, of course, we heard the testimony
sorry,
from
y'all.
Deborah Obad.
I'm sorry. What I said was, honey boo, you need to go work. No, I'm giving my honey boo a hard time. I'm giving him a hard time. But anyway, no. What I said was her dress
Anna alone in his course, that because she is time period, and as Morella
was see-through. What
said, the defendant Parshall in a recorded call, the comedy clubs, lying to her daughters, her family,
no
her
bra,
friends, and Fabio's colleagues.
Ew.
So Deborah Obad, at trial, you heard that she tried to take back all of her prior damaging statements because she's got to get her statements in line with the party line here to try and get her friend off. Even going so far as to admitting that she lied at the grand jury because she so wants to help the defendant and her family, which, as I talked to you about last week, are things that you can take into account, such as bias, interest, motive to lie, admissions of being untruthful. She told you on cross-examination that she suspected the defendant was having an affair. She tried to make it sound like it was later in 2017, but of course on cross-examination, all her prior statements were brought up where she mentioned it was back at the beginning of summer. That she knew that Baker slept over while Fabio was out of town from big blabbermouth Jessica. These are the girls that she feels so close to and feels like she's their second mother. But she never warned Fabio, her close friend, who she claimed, she said, watch out for the racquetball friends, and that's supposed to let him know that his wife might be plotting something behind his back. Never told him she thought the defendant was having an affair because, as she said, she couldn't confirm it, yet she knew that Baker had slept over. On Friday, January 20th, we learned prior to the murder, the Miss Obad made a plan for Jessica to babysit that following Monday, January 23rd, the day of the murder at 4 p.m., which, again, she tried to modify her prior statements. We heard that on January 23rd, when she got to the Sementilli home after receiving a call that she should come over immediately and send.
Bite your tongue, future. She better hope a juror does not cause a hung jury just to bite her for the closing arguments. I'd probably feel offended that she doesn't think I can follow the evidence and take decent notes. Oh my gosh, I didn't even entertain the thought of doing this again because of a hung jury. No hung jury. Not allowed.
Jessica back home. The defendant was saying they killed him. They took the car. And recall, this is prior to anyone seeing the surveillance video that indicated there were two individuals that were participants in this crime. And that on that same night, January 23rd, when she came back to the home after going home to find somebody to watch her child and coming back to help out Monica and the girls, the defendant repeatedly was talking about how she was going to pay for university for her girls, how she was going to pay for health insurance, and that she requested that Obad make contact with several individuals at Fabio's company. We also heard that there was a recorded conversation with Detective Parshall on February 14th, where the defendant told Detective Parshall that the defendant said to Luigi exactly what Luigi testified to. Don't worry, Fabio took good care of you. There's lots of insurance policies. And Obad also told him during this same recorded interview on February 14th that at the wake on January 29th, Baker went into Monica's bedroom where Monica was at the time. Possibly that's when the burner phone gets handed off. We also heard there was another recorded call where Obad calls Parshall on March 7th of 2017, and she asks him why he hasn't put a tracker on the defendant's vehicles, not on Baker's vehicle, on the defendant's vehicles. She wants law enforcement to follow the defendant because she suspects the defendant, even though now she denies that. She recalled that she may have referred to the defendant as a liar, but what we heard from these recorded calls is that she called the defendant a liar over and over and told Detective Parshall that the defendant lies about everything. They also discussed the fact the defendant was going on all of these trips, that she went to Vegas, and that she didn't check in even with the girls anymore when she traveled. We heard that the defense interviewed Miss Obad numerous times. One of those occurred on July 5th of 2017 after the defendant had already been arrested, where she repeated to them, just as she told Detective Parshall, that she saw the defendant and Baker coming out of Monica's bedroom during the wake. We also heard that on March 11th, she drove by the Sementilli home when the defendant had painters there painting the home. And as she said, this was to see what was going on. And when she drove by, she saw Baker's vehicle out front. So she took a picture of the black Expedition and sent it immediately to Detective Parshall and directed him to find out who the vehicle belonged to. So again, when you hear anybody in this case say, well, this is somebody who seemed to be stalking, the only person who involved in any type of stalking behavior in this case was Miss Obad. She also told the detectives that she had told the defendant she needed to replace the security system, but the defendant never did. It fell on deaf ears. She also was asked about her testimony at the grand jury in August of 2017, when the facts would have been fresh in her mind, and that while she was under oath, Obad testified that the defendant, again, told her to contact various people at Wella the night of Fabio's murder regarding the life insurance money. You heard that she referred to herself as Nancy Drew, and that was because she believed she was an investigator on this case. And also, you heard about the fact that she then tried at trial to get you to believe that somehow she might have gotten confused at the grand jury, or that she said things at the grand jury that weren't true. So one of the things, as I mentioned, you can take into account with her is the bias and the motive to lie. And she gave you plenty of that in terms of talking about how close she felt to the family and the daughters and gave them a place to live for 3 years, that she refers to herself as their second mother. But another thing you can take into account, of course, is the fact that she admitted to lying on prior occasions, specifically at the grand jury. What does speak volumes, and I don't know if you all caught this, but when she was asked whether or not she had ever visited the defendant, who was one of her closest friends, she indicated that in all the time the defendant had been in custody over the last 8 years, she hadn't made one visit to visit her, and that she only spoke to her briefly by phone. And that was when the defendant's family or her daughters were at her home, and the defendant called there to speak to them. So again, she was also asked why she didn't warn the defendant, her close friend, that she believed douchebag Rob had brutally murdered her husband and was still hanging out with him. And she told you that was because she didn't want to break the trust that she had with the defendant. Yet you also heard in the same cross-examination the testimony about her going behind the defendant's back to law enforcement, repeatedly telling them that the defendant was a liar, telling them to put trackers on the defendant's vehicles because she was suspicious of her, that she spied on her, that she accessed the defendant's computer files while she was out of town, and that she had the defendant followed from the airport. You also heard on cross-examination that when the defendant returned from Toronto on the night of her 20th anniversary to Fabio, that the defendant went out until 1 a.m, and Obad said that was something that the blabbermouth Jessica told her, Anna and Monica's mother, that she, Monica's sister and mother, colluded together to try and gather information. But you also heard, on the other hand, that Detective Parshall wanted to reach out and speak to Anna, the defendant's sister, but on multiple occasions, Nancy Drew told Detective Parshall that Anna wasn't trustworthy. And that obviously was because she wanted to be the sole source of information to law enforcement, because obviously it made this woman feel very important. And you could plainly see through her testimony, bless you, that she's the kind of person that needs that because she thinks she's smarter than everybody else. We heard that she and the defendant's mother looked through the defendant's computer while the defendant was in Myrtle Beach with Robert Baker at the end of May, that they found receipts for Uber and bars the defendant went to, and she then called Detective Parshall to tell him that the defendant and Baker were on Craigslist swinging, that the defendant was using a fake name, Madonna. And then, of course, Miss Obad admitted she didn't know this side of her friend Monica. And so she sent someone to the airport to spy on her when she came back to see who she was with.
Oh, Yana! Oh, I gotta share this. I gotta share this. Oh, Lord have mercy. I gotta share this. This is good, Yana. Yana. Oh, Yana. Did you just create that? Do y'all see that? You have a worn hoe, a two-pronged hoe, a standard garden hoe, an action hoe, and just a hoe. Oh my gosh, Yana. Oh, Yana, that was priceless. I loved it. I'm sorry, not sorry. I absolutely loved it. Boom. That was definitely what I would call a mic drop. Good one, Yana. I can't unsee that.
On June 5th of 2017, just several days prior to the arrest in this case, there was another recorded
Did you
call
make
that Obad made to Detective Parshall, where she told him the defendant is fucking other couples, repeated that Monica's sister Anna is not to be trusted, that after the murder, the defendant always had her cell phone on her everywhere she went, and that Anna became angry with her when she said, I think your sister's having an affair. Anna said, my sister would never do such a thing.
That was one big toe.
And we also heard that after her arrest, the defendant called her friend, Miss Obad, and asked her to find her an attorney. Despite all of that, nothing changes her mind, just like the defendant's sister, Anna, that the defendant was happily married. So again, another person who's just as delusional as the defendant's family, that she proceeded to throw under the bus, as we heard about from her numerous calls to law enforcement.
Good.
Now, just before the Mirror Awards, we heard that Salma Cherry went to LA Fitness to work out, and he ran into the defendant, and that she was there.
Why are you blaming my honey? Why? Why are you blaming my Honey, he didn't do anything.
You also heard that while she was in Toronto for these awards, she was staying with her family, and you heard that there was a confrontation that took place where her sister, her mother, and her brother-in-law confronted her about what they had found in her computer, about the affair, her use of the name
Okay.
Madonna, and the
take that.
sex dates that she had set up for herself and Rob. And you recall what Anna described as the defendant's
Look at what's on the monitor. So they're seeing pictures we're not. God, I hope we
response
don't
to
have
this
private folks
family
popping up.
meeting. And it wasn't shame, as I mentioned earlier. In fact, it was righteous indignation. She couldn't believe she was being asked these questions and refused to answer and walked away. And here
Amen,
she
hon.
is flying back after that family
Oh, they
confrontation
got a dog.
to LA wearing Baker's army shirt and taking selfies that she sends to him. Because as we know, during this trip, the first end of it, or the first leg of it, is when she flies out to New York City for Vanessa's medical school graduation. And she gets that email, that fake email from Detective Parshall. She believes she's going home to meet up with Baker because she's going to finally be cleared to receive, at long last, Fabio's life insurance proceeds. And then, of course, the day of the arrest, she messages Baker in the morning that she's on the computer cleaning up, getting rid of anything that can potentially tie her to the murder. We know that a short while later, Robbery Homicide Division has been planning for her return. They have a task force of people to finally take down this woman who's been lying and cheating all this time, who they know participated in the conspiracy to have her husband murdered. And so she's pulled over by Officer Curtis Davis and his partner. You heard that Detective Camacho, you see there on the top right, is responsible for recovering the phones from the vehicle, including the defendant's 2 phones that are in the photograph in the center, in the Mustang inside of her Porsche, inside of the purse, as well as Baker's Samsung S8. You heard that his Samsung S4 that he previously used was found during a search warrant at his apartment at the Independence address that day, that the defendant's home, a search warrant is served there. Her iPad, her desktop computer, various other items are seized. And then you heard that when they recover the defendant's Apple iPhone, the iPhone 7, iPhone 119 that I talked to you about during opening statement, there's this whole conversation that happens at the cell door where the detectives are trying to get the password so they can open her phone so that they can download the contents. And she gives them one set of numbers after another or after a number, all of which are false. Turns out the password was Robert Baker's birth year, 1962. And so she intentionally locks the phone by giving them all these passwords. So eventually the phone has to be sent to Celebrate. They unlock it and we get into it anyway. And then you also heard the other item was that ZTE flip phone 120, the burner phone from Baker that we talked about last week, which the defendant also talked about in the various recordings from the lockup with Robert Baker. If you recall, the defendant and Baker, after they are removed from the Mustang, they are placed in the back of the black and white patrol car where a recording device is set up. This is only 53 seconds. It's supposed to just click it.
I hear nothing. I hear nothing. Nothing. Nothing.
Listen. I know, listen. Gotta get a lawyer immediately.
Okay. So as you
Good.
recall, we played for you
I did not want to listen another 5 hours of heavy breathing whispering.
the relevant portion of this during our case, and it's been a while probably since you've remembered this, but you can play it over the short version that we have clipped for you, or you can
No,
play the
I think
long
they're
version
fine.
if you choose to do so. But again, she says deny everything. Got it? Everything. So again, as I mentioned last week, they're clearly not covering up for an affair, right? Because you don't get put into the back of a patrol car for having an affair. And then you heard Baker stay, as we talked about again last week, stay in protocol. Again, they planned for this. They know this might eventually happen. And then the defendant's response is, somebody did this. Somebody talked, and they whisper. Again, the reason she's whispering is because, again, at the very beginning of the recording, Baker says, there's recording devices probably all over this thing. And you heard that that should have been the case, but unfortunately, everything that LAPD did to have duplicate listening devices in the back seat, one was turned off instead of being turned on. Another one wasn't working. Another one wasn't put in. One problem after another. But we still get a fair amount of admissions by the defendant and whispering, which I told you can take into account with respect to conscience of guilt. Now, the reason the defense wanted to play the long version for you was because, as you recall, in the long version, you can hear these long periods of time where the defendant is gasping for breath, right? Because the argument is, oh, look at how badly law enforcement treated her. She's in the back of a patrol car. The problem is the guy next to her is having no problem breathing and speaking. She's having a panic attack, right? Because it's one thing to plan for your eventual arrest and what's coming next. It's another thing to actually be in the situation where you're taken into custody and you hear on the radio that you're being arrested for murder and you're now in the back of a patrol car. You also heard from Detective Gable with respect to what happened after the defendant and Baker are transported to Van Nuys Station. The first thing the defendant does, he comes to the cell door, and like I said, she provides various codes for the phone. I think one was 1972, and some others that you'll see in the recording and in the transcript. It turns out, it's, like I said, it's his birth year. She also comes up with this fake story about the ZTE burner phone. She says she found it in the garage just before she left for New York and Toronto in June of 2017, that she was on her way to the store with this phone. She was going to have them hook it up so she could see what was on it, so she could figure out what it was. And as you know, the problem with that whole story is she took that phone with her on January 31st, 5 months prior, when she went to Toronto. And I showed you that last week from the Celebrite report where it says, welcome to Toronto. So, and then she and Baker discuss the story that she's given law enforcement about the burner phone. And he says, oh, that's good. You can just say you found it in the back of the truck, or I left it there. So again, they're trying to concoct and get their stories straight. so they can present a united defense. And then also we hear that she tells them when they come to the cell door that they want the combination to the safe. They want to go into the safe. And you saw from the Celebrate some of the reports we put in for June 14th, when the detectives go out from robbery homicide to serve the search warrants, because there's simultaneous warrants going down at the Queen Victoria residence, as well as at Baker's apartment on Independence. The safe is opened and closed numerous times, and it keeps sending the text messages from Digital Life because they keep opening the mirror to look to see, to make sure somebody's gone in there. And so on that Celebrate report for June 14th, they keep opening the mirror over and over again, and it works just like she said. It sends messages to her phone, and you'll see that on the Celebrate report for June 14th. So we know, like I said, that she deleted the one for the day of the murder, January 23rd, because it shows up on the mobility records, even though on her phone Celebrate report, it's been deleted. And so she also tells the detective she doesn't know the combination for the safe. Only Fabio used it. She doesn't know it. Another set of lies. And then, again, you guys are now experts on Perkins operations. And I can actually say Perkins operation. You know exactly what I'm talking about. They put her into the cell with this undercover cellmate, and she repeatedly changes her story. And the cellmate is acting like she's an idiot, but that she's catching on because initially the defendant tells her cellmate she didn't have anything but a friendship with Baker. He was her close friend. They hung out together. He was a family friend. And she goes, oh, so he was also friends with your husband? And she goes, yeah, but really more with me. And then it kind of evolves. And as the detectives keep coming to the cell door, the inmate then says to her, well, it sounds like it was more than just a friend. And she says, well, he was certainly not my boyfriend. And then she goes on to say, I didn't really want a husband. I didn't want a boyfriend. And then it goes on to talking about the fact that they took some trips together. And she says, but it was only 2. And it was always with 4 or 5 or 6 other people. And we always shared a room. But when we hang out, a lot of the times it's my idea. So again, getting rid of any defense they have that she's being forced into this relationship. And she tells the cellmate, you know, law enforcement, they never asked me about Baker, which obviously is not true. She also tells the undercover cellmate she never cheated on her husband. She wasn't seeing Baker before the murder. And then when they come back, Detective Gable comes back to the door and says, hey, we've gotten into your phone. We've seen the photos. We know about the relationship. We know about the trips you've been taking because, of course, both G&D and SIS have been following them, and they know about all of this information, including from the trackers on the vehicles. She then changes her story and says, well, Baker, he was her confidant. He was her lover. He was her everything. We know that to be the case. And then she says, okay, well, maybe Baker was a little bit more than just after her husband's murder. Now she's starting to admit that maybe a little bit before his murder, they started to be involved. And then she comes up with this story where she tells him that she cracked Baker over the head with her racket, and that he probably won't remember this, but there was blood that was all over her racket and all over her shoes. And you heard that there was one spot on one shoe, and there's no blood on any racket. And you also have the LA Fitness records that I think that's the last exhibit that we put in so that you could see later on when she and Baker are in the lockup together talking about the racquetball injury story and trying to get the facts together when they say, well, it can't be that day because that was the day Jessica said I worked out with her. So it might have been the day before. So we put in the records from LA Fitness because you'll see that on the 21st and 22nd, the defendant did not go to LA Fitness. And then she goes on and she tells her cellmate that she's been so helpful to law enforcement. She's given them all the information they asked for. She doesn't know what an encrypted app even is. What are they asking her about? She's
She's retrying the entire trial.
never used the safe. She doesn't have the code to open it. Only her husband did the safe. And then the cellmate starts to ask her, well, it sounds like from what they're telling you, they're saying Baker's DNA is all over the crime scene. Sounds like he did it. Like he's the one, the guy that you've been having an affair with. That's the guy that killed your husband. What are you going to do? And the first thing the defendant says, and nobody's mentioned anything about money. She says, well, it's not for money. It's not for gain. She brings that up all on her own, the financial gain special circumstance. She knows exactly what's going on. And she then proceeds to say, I assume Baker had his own money because, you know, he's like, you know, he managed people and things like that. And then she goes on to say things.
Well, Elena, I did a poll. How many more hours will the prosecution continue her closing? 1 to 2 hours, it's got 28% of the votes. 2 to 3 and 3 to 4, respectfully, 14% each of the votes. And 4 or more hours got 42%. That was the vote.
About how her husband never treated her badly, that he was the love of her life. Of course, this is the same person she's been married to for 20 years almost, and she never spent any time grieving because she was too busy going out with her lover. And that she knows that her husband, you would have to believe, as I said last week, that she brought home a towel that was so covered in blood that it is literally dripping blood all over the entry, all over the kitchen, all over the garage, and that Delia Rivera, who appears to be someone who is extremely conscientious, just forgot to clean up all these blood drops all over the house and left that day with blood everywhere. So again, when you...
At least her pace is steady, and it's not talking about like this fast, and then you got to try to type everything as quick as you can.
Saw us asking questions about where's the bloody towel when she's walking out of LA Fitness, or where is Baker's hand dripping blood when he walks out of LA Fitness. We didn't see anything like that. And again, just like I mentioned last week, how does the blood somehow miraculously from this dripping towel get transferred to various objects that were clearly strewn around her bedroom to set up a staged burglary scene? So before they're even arrested and charged with murder, they start creating their joint defense. They were involved in a conspiracy to commit murder where they act together. They were involved together in creating a defense, and they came up with a joint story that they were going to tell to law enforcement to try and explain away the DNA in the house. Because remember, Detective Parshall was not giving the defendant any of the results of the DNA testing, but Baker knew he cut himself there. So they had to find a way to be able to explain that away. And we heard that in some of the recordings in the lockup. And then, as you heard, even after this conversation, again, where the detectives are telling the defendant, hey, your lover's blood is all over the crime scene, the defendant continues her relationship with Baker after being told this. So recall, of course, with respect to the testimony of Detective Mitzi Roberts about how she went through the 60 hours of them in the cells numerous times over and over and over again. And yet there's no recordings in 60 hours. There's no recordings of the defendant saying to Baker, how is it that your blood is all over my house? What did you do? She never confronts him with the fact that she now knows and is discussed with her cellmate. Well, now we know, never confronts him with the fact that he's the actual killer. Instead, what you hear is the two of them acting together to explain it away in 60 hours. And you heard that again, in these 60 hours of them conversing in the lockups, whether it's here or in Van Nuys, they don't talk about Fabio by name. They don't even use his name. They refer to him as him. It had a picture of him, Baker says, when they're talking about a news article. And the defendant says the estate lawyers have been hired to protect his assets. Or the defendant talks about his family, because he's not even important enough to mention by name. It's like he never even existed. And of course, another thing that you're never going to hear in any of the recordings, you never hear the defendant expressing any concern about law enforcement catching or apprehending or identifying the real killers or the actual killers in this case, if it's not her and Robert Baker. And again,
It's
wouldn't
okay.
somebody who found out
Wasn't that great?
that their lover had come into
Isn't
their
that fun?
home and murdered their children's parent want nothing to do with that person ever again, knowing the way it was done in such a cold, brutal, vicious manner, where he's stabbed to death at their home, taking away all of their sense of safety in their home? If you knew that your lover had committed a vicious murder of your husband, stabbed him through the heart, wouldn't you confront that person and then want nothing to do with them? What goes on in the lockup for years defies logic and common sense. You heard in the
She's
first
getting there, y'all.
lockup recording, which took place June 29th, a couple weeks after they're arrested, the first thing the defendant is telling Baker is no deals, none. However, she then goes on to say, if there's more evidence, we're fucked. Again, they're not talking about covering up for an affair. If there's more evidence, we're fucked.
Really?
I'm denying everything except our affair. Well, what else is there if it's only an affair? Ride or die. I was asked if it was you. I said, no fucking way. She's talking about how she's covering up for him, for the two of them, and what they planned. And what is Baker's response from the very beginning? Stick with the program, just like you heard in the back of the black and white protocol. And he refers to them as Bonnie and Clyde. He calls her Mrs. Baker, and he tells her destroy the letters that he's provided to her, passed to her in the lockup in Van Nuys, flush them down the toilet. And she says the next time that they come to the courthouse in Van Nuys, August 7th of 2017, I have stuff for you too, but you have to flush it. And we heard the sound of the flushing. And then she tells him the burner, meaning the burner phones. They're discussing the evidence in this case. And she talks about the assets. Everything's been frozen. I can't even sell my house now. And he tells her, don't worry, babe, resolute. In other words, stay strong. August 24th, the courthouse lockup here, right out of this courtroom in this door right here. She says to him, to Baker, they have a camera at Payless Shoes. They have no video of you. Remember how he met up with her there outside of the Payless? And he says, of us? Because, of course, it's the two of them meeting up, not just him. And she says, none. The video was only for a month or two, right? And then he says, and nothing on the other one at night, too. Well, what are they talking about? They're talking about the night before, where they were going to kill him at the strip mall, January 22nd. Nothing on the other one at night, too. They think they've made it. They're going to get out of this. And then the defendant says, I answered the way I was supposed to when they're talking about their interviews with law enforcement. Remember I said they got together and planned how they were going to answer and what their stories were going to be, I answered the way I was supposed to, meaning the way we planned. I'll never abandon you. And what does he say? This is way back in August of 2017. Same thing that you saw right in front of your eyes when he came into this courtroom. I'll take the blame before anything. I'll lie.
Wow.
I'll lie and take it. If everything goes south, I will figure a way to get us to break you out. Consciousness of guilt.
That's pretty guilty. Guilty. In my humble opinion.
And here the defendant on August 31st tells the defendant, I told my lawyers, I love him. I can't not talk to him. And on November 2nd of 2017, I want to go home with you. I heard they can't get into it because it's encrypted. Otherwise, I'm dead. She's talking about the messages back and forth, right? From Viber and WhatsApp. Otherwise, I'm dead. Meaning if they get into what we've encrypted and they're able to get what we've deleted, I'm dead. And on January 4th, I'm going to put your initials on me, right? We heard them in the back talking about tattooing, and then we saw their jail letters and the pictures she draws where she puts an RB tattoo either on her back or on her finger. And then she says, someone's going to pay for this. And then, of course, the letters, which we went through one afternoon. On June 28th of 2017, we know the defendant sent numerous letters, jail kites, to Baker while they were in custody. And she refers to Baker as her ride or die. She calls him her everything, not her husband of 20 years, Baker. Ride or die, 100%. We must do what we said we would. And she refers to herself in all of these letters and signs them Mrs. Baker. And she talks about sticking to their protocol. She says, as you can see on the cutout piece, I've stuck to protocol. Again, meaning their plan. It admitted to love affair of about a year. That's all they're going to admit to, just as she said, as you heard her say out of her own mouth on the recordings. And then the way she says it at the end, always on my mind, with all of my fiber, Mrs. Baker.
Lunches.
And then in another letter, this one was dated July 1st, ride or die, MB for Monica Baker. This one sent through, as you heard, a pen pal. Another inmate's name, Nishia Hayer. Ride or die, always and forever. Like we're talking about high school kids passing notes in class. That's how serious
it is. Very juvenile, I will admit.
Here, July 7th. The defendant says, resolute, sticking to the plan. That's what that means. Protocol. She repeats the same phrase Baker said, right? And here, August 8th, 2017, the defendant says, I love you so very much, baby. Thank you for fighting. Thank you for loving me. My soulmate. Love, Monica Baker. For eternity. This is as she's facing murder charges in this case. This is the stuff she's writing. Because of course they don't think they're going to get caught. And then she writes this, dated August 10th of 2017. I need all of you. I can't wait to see you again, my love. And of course, where do they see each other? Every time they come to court, right? Because they're co-defendants in this indictment. Yours eternally, Monica/Madonna Baker. And like I said, in the drawings that she keeps sending to him, very similar to the photographs that she takes. Nobody's forcing her to take the photos. Nobody's forcing her to draw these things. My man, my baby, my love, my bestie, my soulmate. Remember when she told Detective Castro at the Wella Memorial, May 29th of 2017, when they're talking to her, and she says, my boyfriend was my husband. He was my soulmate, right? And then here, this is what she puts in writing that she doesn't think they're ever going to see. And again, RD, ride or die, Mrs. Robert L. Baker, Robert Louis Baker, because I told you she has him in her contacts under a fake name in her phone. Remember that, Louisa? You are everything to me, she writes in this last line behind these characters she draws. And then you saw and heard about the encrypted kites that they send to each other. In this case, Baker was leaving encrypted messages for her in the lockup going up the staircase. And you heard from Detective Balderrama that she wasn't able to take possession of these items because he had his eyes on her the entire time. There's a secret way that they communicated while they were in there, as you heard from Detective Roberts. Very similar to the coding or the encrypted apps that they used when they were on the outside. And then we heard that they went to great efforts to communicate without anybody knowing, even their attorneys. Again, another attempt to try and manipulate the system. And you heard them in the jail recordings where they talk about clean calls, where they use other inmates' PIN numbers so they can't be traced back to them. And they call through third parties, as I discussed last week. You even heard Baker, when he calls his friend Lynch, the lawyer, calls through the law office. In the law office, they're using the law office for their ongoing conspiracy to communicate. He refers to the defendant, his girlfriend, as my crimey, his crime partner. Because again, who's going to be listening to somebody calling a law office? Those are privilege calls, aren't they? Yeah, not when they're not actually your lawyer. Not when you're trying to cover up for a conspiracy to commit murder that hasn't ended because you haven't yet received the benefit, meaning the money, the object of the conspiracy.
So my recess for 15.
Now we get a 15-minute break. Woohoo! And we got 20 minutes before we go over to the Lori Dable. Yay, Lori Dable. That will be entertaining, none to say the least. I'll tell you what's nice is that I can't eat a lot at one time. I eat a lot of small meals in the day. That's why I'm always snacking. It's nice having somebody to share a meal with so I don't waste the food. Everybody get up and stretch. Let's do a stretch break. Get up, stretch. Go get your drink. Go get you some food. Yes, we are on a short break. We'll be right back. My honey bun just asked me, how is Lori Vallow going to be entertaining? She didn't send out subpoenas or anything. And I'm all like, are you kidding me? And she did an interview, which some of us have caught. I'm trying to get this thing to, it's not doing what I want. Hold on. There we go. The mic wasn't sitting right. Lori Vallow, did an interview just a few days ago with a woman claiming that this is going to be hard. It's not going to be fair because I didn't have time to plan. Oh, thank you, Elena. You're so fabulous. Yeah, I'm getting ready to get me a cup of coffee. But thank you for supporting the coffee fund because I'm going to need it, especially when we have both of these trials going at one time. But the thing is that Lori Vallow, well, Lori Daybell now is what she wants to be called, was going through the woes of being your own attorney and being in lockdown for 23 hours a day and not having time to do anything, not having time to, prepare her defense. And I mean, she was going on and on and on and on about how unfair all this is. I'm like, biatch, please. Please, woman. I'm looking to see if I can find that video. I don't know if I can. Let me Google it. Lori Daybell interview 2 days ago. Hold on a minute. Oh.
Like be on camera, my handwriting's really. Ma'am, can you please state your full name and then spell your last?
Wanted.
Hi, Lori. First and foremost, I want to ask you, why did you decide to represent yourself at this trial?
There's lots of reasons.
Hold on. I'm going
Per is not an easy job. I'm not an attorney.
It's really sloppy. We're rolling. I've been so curious to talk to you for a long time. First and foremost, I want to ask you, why did you decide to represent yourself at this trial?
There's lots of reasons.
during a lunch break, I will show interviews and we will talk about another trial on lunch break. But when we're in trial, let's try to keep it on topic. Does that make sense?
Obviously, being pro per is not an easy job. I'm not an attorney.
Sure.
I don't have training to be an attorney. There's something that I figured out when I got to this jail. This experience has been 5 years running. Okay. I went through a whole trial, before in my other state. And then I was brought here to Arizona to face some more serious charges. And I came here with the intention of having a speedy trial, right? I wanted to, these charges came first, right? So they're like 5 years old. So I, first talked to the attorneys. I was like, they've had 5 years, the prosecutors, to put their case together. And I really want to go to trial. Like, we need to go. So I'm in a max pod, with the max women. And there's about 8 women in my pod facing death penalty. And, I was facing the death penalty in Idaho. I was the only one in that jail because it's a very small town and a small jail. But here, these women have been waiting for their trials for 5, 6, 7, 8 years to go to trial in a jail. Okay. And then during this experience, I've been in 4 different facilities during this experience, right? Because I've been shuffled all over the country, right? Came from Hawaii to Idaho to Boise, back and forth. So I've experienced 5 different facilities now. This is the 5th facility I've been in, and it is the worst.
What exactly about the conditions bothers you the most? Because, everyone's going to say, what did you expect? You've been convicted of multiple murders. So what were you expecting in this jail?
Well, the people that are in this jail haven't been convicted of anything, that are in the same exact situation as I am. They're innocent. They're innocent right now, and they've been here for 5, 6, 7, 8 years eating slop every day, the same thing, every single day, not going out in the sunshine, not having proper medical care, not having proper dental. If something goes wrong with your teeth, you know what the dentist will do from jail? They pull your tooth out. That's it.
So you're fighting for the other inmates here who are waiting for their time in court.
This is what I found out. Arizona, different from other states, and I only know the 2 states because I've only dealt with 2 judicial systems, right? Has no intention of giving anybody a speedy trial, even though it's your constitutional federal right. Okay? So what I am fighting for these women, I'm fighting for these women and trying to set a precedence here that you can't just leave these women in jail for years.
You mean to tell me you're playing the martyr? You are now a martyr? Are you kidding me? Oh, I'm fighting for everybody here because I'm already screwed because I've already got death. I'm already in with life without the possibility of parole. I'm a saint. Oh, that's it. We're going to start calling her Saint Lori. Fighting for the rights of other women. Y'all.
Because the conditions at the prison, if you do get convicted, are a million times better than they are at the jail. Jails are not designed. They're not designed all over the country. Jails are not designed to let you stay long term. The average person in jail goes 3 months. You're in there for 8 years. You've had teeth pulled out all over. You don't have any kind of thing that you need here. So I talked to my attorneys and said, I need to go. And they said, we can't do it because
Oh, honey, I'm not calling her that kind of saint. I'm not calling her a holy saint. Saint pain in my ass.
I agreed with them, right? Because I said, from their professional stand, they want to go to court prepared, right?
Of course.
I'm a hairstylist. I used to charge tons and tons of money in Austin, Texas to do hair. So I'm not going to charge someone $400 to do their hair. And
you used to live in Austin, Texas, and you charged them tons and tons of money to do their hair? How are you getting your hair done in prison? I mean, in jail. Look at it. I guess they had a makeup team take care of her.
And let them walk out the door and not let it look good because that's my reputation. So I talked to my attorneys. I said, I understand where you're coming from. I understand 100%. I don't want to put you in the position where you're saying, I can't do a good job for you. I can't do this for you in this amount of time. But I've been working on my case for 5 years. So I know my case better than an attorney can learn it in 2 years. But here's the thing. When you waive your speedy trial, then they can keep you here as long as they want. There are intelligent, strong, beautiful women in here that have been here for 8 years because of family tragedies. It's the same like my case. A family tragedy, not a crime. A family tragedy. And they're waiting and they're facing the death penalty for a family tragedy. I know.
Wait a minute. So are you now the judge and jury and you've deemed them innocent? I know they're innocent until proven guilty, but come on now. Really?
These women, I talk to them every day. I try to uplift, strengthen, and help women in this jail. And I think that's the purpose why I'm here.
Can you define family tragedy for me?
Yeah.
Obviously, you were convicted of killing your kids. Where does that
Wrongly
disconnect?
Convicted.
You believe wrongly convicted.
Absolutely, 100%.
So then how do you address that? You were convicted of it. They're not here.
Thank
So what
you
happened?
so much. And the snack food. Yeah, I haven't gotten my snack food yet. I got to figure out what I can eat that's healthy that I can snack on here. Healthy.
Okay.
Can we cut for just a second?
Now she's getting emotional. Oh, they're
At
talking
some
to
point, you're not an attorney.
Correct.
You know your case, but you're not an attorney.
Correct.
How do you expect this is going to work for you next week and in these months to come,
do that.
acting as your own lawyer?
I have help.
I think people have wrong about you.
That's why I'm here.
Can you define family tragedy for me?
Yeah.
Obviously, you were convicted.
Sorry, guys. By the way, celery. Ugh.
Expect this is going to work for you next week and in these months to come, acting as your own lawyer?
I have help. I have a wonderful team that I got to hire, which is great. I have my paralegal. That's wonderful. I have my investigator. I have my
understand.
advisory counsel
got it.
that helps me. I'm just going to do the best that I can. That's all I can do. I'm trying to help the women here. Like, something that happens in Arizona that didn't happen in Idaho, something that's different, is there they really respect your right to a speedy trial. And so I wouldn't waive my speedy trial, and they finally pushed it to trial. It does, the judge does go over, and they, for any reason, they can move your speedy trial out, right? But here, the first time you go to court here, if your attorney stands up for you and says, oh, we're going to need more time because you were supposed to go in 4 months, right? You have a certain amount of time and you're supposed to go in 150 days. And if your attorney says that, it automatically waives your right to a speedy trial. So the women that are here and their attorneys say, we're going to help you, we're going to put your case together, we're going to do all this stuff. They didn't know the first time that their speedy trial got waived, because they're like me. I mean, I was 46 years old when I got arrested. I've never been arrested before. I didn't know how the judicial system worked. They're in the same boat. So they didn't actually know at the time that they were waiving their speedy trial right.
I've been in the courtroom for some of this, and then I've watched it as well. When you're addressing the judge in the state, you can get a little snappy with them. And I know you're upset with what you feel as witnesses that are being precluded from the trial. What's your biggest complaint? What do you want to
She called that one that hit right on the nose.
see happen? And is that the tone that you want to take throughout this trial?
I don't think that I'm trying to set a tone. That's not my intention, is to set a tone. And I'm not a fighter. Okay. So my whole life, I've been a peacemaker. I'm a person that loves everybody, a person that gets along with everybody. I don't like to fight. So,
But you unalived 5 people potentially.
this is a challenge.
Oh, sorry.
Help the women here. Like, something that happens in Arizona that didn't happen in Idaho, something that's different, is there they really respect your right to a speedy trial. And so I wouldn't waive my.
What, do I have a copyright problem? I don't understand. How come everybody else is showing this interview? Why can't I? I don't understand. I know, Gerald, honey, I know. It's just pissing me off. I don't know how to get this undone, so I'm going to have to. No. Am I back up? Okay. It looks like I'm back up. Okay, we're back up and running. Okay, guys. That's BS. That is BS, y'all. Total BS. When other people have streamed that entire freaking live, just like me. Hope we're coming back in on the court. Okay, guys, I apologize for that. I don't understand it. I think it's crap. Now let's see how bad I get hurt. But it just pisses me off because how are other YouTubers just like me using that entire stream, that entire video, and not getting dinged for it? But when I do it, I get dinged. Anybody have any ideas? Let me know. Anyway, we're back on the 15-minute break. Let's go back in.
May have played one jail call or jail visit for you. And this is the one where Isabella comes to visit her mother on April 8th of 2018. And of course, Isabella has no idea what ride or die means or what it relates to. But in this case, I wanted to point out to you that you have the defendant who's written in ink ride or die on the back of her neck. And knowing now that
By the way, guys, she got a tattoo in prison on the back of her neck that says ride or die. I'm like, that's insane.
ride or die relates to the protocol between the defendant and Baker as to what their plan is to try and thwart justice if they're ever arrested. This is what the defendant is making fun of to her daughter, because of course, in this case, what she's been arrested for is the murder of Isabella's father and the pact that the defendant and Baker have made
It's down
to
on
take
the-
their conspiracy to kill her father to their graves. Kind of gives new meaning to this piece of evidence. So again, I, from the beginning, have been going over with you the various types of evidence in this case, the physical evidence, the evidence through witness testimony, circumstantial evidence, direct evidence. But of course, as I've told you when I went through the law with you on last Thursday, that applies to the charges and the special circumstance allegations, we went through what the evidence is, and at least some of it in this case. And I'm not going to go over it again today because I think you're all well aware by now that there are a lot of items of evidence that were presented at trial, and now perhaps you're starting to get how they all fit together to form the larger.
Why didn't you just go boom, 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 boom right through this in an hour? Why do we have to be 3 days?
Puzzle, so that you're able to go back there and hopefully your jury deliberations will go very efficiently and smoothly, and
Unlike
maybe
your
even
closing
quickly.
argument.
Again, one of the instructions that I mentioned last week deals with this issue of consciousness of guilt. And Judge Cohen is going to read you that instruction probably tomorrow, that deal with different ways that fall under this category of consciousness of guilt or evidence of consciousness of guilt. You can do it by suppressing evidence, by trying to keep it from coming out, concealing evidence. We heard a lot about that, and the destruction of evidence. And we heard an awful lot of evidence about that. So think of things, this is that I've mentioned previously, deleting the encrypted applications and therefore all the messaging related, cleaning up the computer, whispering at times when they know they're being recorded. That would be suppressing or trying to conceal, flushing jail kites or jail letters, destruction, destroying jail mail, hiding letters from each other in other inmates' bunks. That could be suppression. It could also be concealing. Using other inmates' PIN numbers to make clean calls. Again, ways of trying to get around the system, to hide what you're trying to talk about. Using other inmates' names to send jail mail to each other, to and from, so that it won't be detected and identified as yours, or calling through third parties such as Howard Lynch or Baker's sister, or whatever real relationship April is.
FYI, we do have that starting. So I'm going to start the other live. Hopefully she'll end just in time for us to hop over.
Now, again, keep in mind, and I mentioned this several times last week, the standard in this case is proof beyond a reasonable doubt, not beyond all possible doubt, not beyond an imaginary doubt, but it has to be based on reason and common sense. And I talked about that last week, and I think for you all, I think you are understand that and understand what you're being tasked with here. But also keep in mind when you look at all of the evidence in this case, and there is an overwhelming amount of evidence, obviously. I've been able to talk for 2.5 days, and I could probably go on, as I said, for days more. I didn't think I'd be here this long, but there is an enormous amount of evidence in this case. And we know that all of the evidence in this case was created by the defendant along with her co-conspirator, Robert Baker, as well as to some degree, Chris Austin. And so you also have the January 22nd attempt to kill him. And we know that in this case, you got an idea of what that life, the Sementilli life, looked like prior to all of this, knowing that the defendant basically destroyed all of that. She threw it all away in order to be with Baker, even as she's in custody. She's doubling down on it, right? And she's saying, my baby, my soulmate, wait for me. We're going to be together. This is their future. This is their plan. And we also heard that when they were in the cells being recorded in the lockup, that they talked about the fact that they deserve each other, that they've earned a right to each other. And on that, I would say they are correct. So you heard from, as I said, numerous people throughout the course of this trial, all people who the defendant lied to, took advantage of, manipulated, and or coerced. And you heard that time and time again, over and over again, with respect to everything. And you recall way back at the beginning when we were talking about the crime scene and what Detective Parshall and Verna and Castro, Efren Gutierrez, all of these detectives that went out there to try and get a sense of what went on in this particular case, that when Detective Efren Gutierrez walked through the crime scene with the defendant and Detective Parshall on their way out the following morning on January 24th of 2017. Remember, Detective Gutierrez said to Detective Parshall, he testified that he told him he thought the defendant was full of crap. Remember that? And it was because of her very unusual demeanor in the aftermath of her husband's murder. And it turns out that all of this comes back full circle now that you've heard all of the evidence since that crime scene and everything that the defendant and Baker created in the aftermath in trying to go back and destroy everything behind them and conceal evidence. But it turns out that Detective Gutierrez was 100% correct. And when you think about what happened in this case, the fact that so many people were deceived, including, and most of all, most importantly, her family, meaning her two daughters who thought they had parents that loved each other, that they had, as you heard, an amazing mother. And of course, Fabio Sementilli, who believed that his wife was there to share his life with him, to raise their family, that he trusted her and never would in a million years have suspected anything like this would have been coming. But then you also see in this case over the course of the last 2 months how the defendant used people, used even her own daughters, like pawns in order to get them to do things that she needed them to do, or to guilt them into feeling bad for wanting her to come home when they were afraid to be alone in the home alone where their father was murdered. And that, again, she's the one that brought us all here. I told you last week that we're all here in this courtroom because of one person, and it's because of her. She's the one who destroyed so many lives and their entire family. No one else did that. There's no one else to blame for any of that. Your job is to look at all of the evidence. That means all the witness testimony. And you can go through the evidence in any way you so choose. But there is a tremendous amount of evidence, and it's your job to go through it and to decide whether or not the evidence in this case proves the defendant's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. I would say at this point, based on the overwhelming evidence of guilt that you've heard over the course of the last 2 months, that there is no doubt. And when I think about a jury trial, I think about it in terms of the fact that a trial is really a search for truth, right? We're trying to get at what really happened, who's responsible. And in this case,
Yakety yak, don't talk back. You remember that? That's very old.
what you heard and what I've talked to you about a little bit this morning was the defendant tried to hide the truth. She, along with her ride or die, Robert Baker, they destroyed evidence. They deleted evidence. They tried to hide the planning behavior. They tried to hide the conspiracy, the fact that they were working together to bring about a common result that they both intended and wanted. That would be the death of Fabio Sementilli, so that they could have this new future together and so that they would have a way to be able to pay for this future that they wanted. Because, of course, when the defendant is offered a job opportunity by one of Fabio's friends, by Ernie, that's not what she wants. She doesn't want to have to work for it. So she wants to be able to live her life with somebody else paying for it. And so when you hear about all of the evidence that they destroyed, you have to keep in mind that these are two individuals who didn't believe that they would ever get caught. They didn't believe that there would be a jury now sitting here listening to all of these things that they thought weren't going to be captured on these recordings, that when they were whispering, somehow we would miss that, or the way that they managed to communicate to one another. It was so convoluted and complicated that we would never be able to retrieve any of that, those jail kites. And in fact, what you heard is that we were able to retrieve some of it and enough of it so that you could add it on top of everything that you have from the evidence from the crime itself. And now you layer on top of it all of their own words, their recordings, and their own words in their jail mail. But all of this was done very intentionally to prevent you from being able to learn about and to hear the truth. But as you heard, it doesn't work like that. And in this case, it didn't. And that all of this evidence of conscience of guilt is yet more evidence that you can layer on, even on top of that, of this mountain of evidence, all of it pointing to the defendant's guilt. So very soon, this is going to be, this case, the responsibility for this is going to be turned over to you. I know you're all ready for that, and you know that your job is to be able to evaluate the evidence in this case, even though there is an enormous amount, to apply the law that Judge Cohen is going to provide you with. But in this case, you already know the truth. And you know there's a vast amount of evidence in this case, and you just have to put all of the pieces together. And I've tried to do that over the course of the last couple of days. But in this case, it's very obvious that the defendant, along with her lover, murdered Fabio Sementilli, along with assistance from Christopher Austin, that the murder was committed for financial gain, as well as for other motivations. In other words, their future together, that the murder was committed by means of lying in wait, because Fabio Sementilli, in this case, was ambushed based on a secret plan or design that the defendant and her lover put into place, and that the defendant, along with Robert Baker and Christopher Austin, conspired in order to kill Fabio Sementilli on January 22nd, as well as on January 23rd of 2017. And ultimately, we all know that they were successful because their planning was so meticulous. And so I thank you for the time and attention you have shown, and I hope that your deliberations go smoothly.
Hello, Mathis. Welcome, welcome. You didn't follow this case. How are they 3 days and closing arguments? Well, there was a day and 2/3 of closing opening arguments with this woman, and she is the song that never ends. Yeah. So what we're going to do is I'm going to start the Valo live. It is open court. It is starting, and then I'm going to come back and close down this live. I will have it running. I'll let you know when it goes into verdict watch, or we'll keep an eye on it. But right now I'm going to switch lives. Oh, she's about to end, but I thought she was about to end an hour ago. So I'm going to let this run for a minute. I'm going to open up the new live, and then I'll be back.
Smoothly. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's take 10 minutes while we allow the defense to set up for their argument. The evidence applies. I'll see you back in about 10 minutes.
Time for us to hop on over to Lori Dago. Her trial is getting ready to begin. Court is now in session. I will meet you over there, Rihanna. I understand, but please help us say like and leave. But we will be finishing this tonight after the Lori Dago trial is done for the day. So in the meantime, I'll see you over at Lori Dago. Thanks for watching.
Please comment, like, share, and most importantly, subscribe. I hope you have an awesome day. Till next time, take care.